Hey, true believers, do you love politics? Do you love comic books? Well, Superhero Politics is for you. It combines the comical nature of politics and the political nature of comic books. Join us, like, share, and experience the world of comics and politics in a way that you never have before. This is Superhero Politics, and I'm your host, Michael Holmes. What's up, true believers, and welcome back to Superhero Politics. I know it's been a minute. I know. But hey, it's been for very good reason. Your boys had a lot going on and some pretty good, cool stuff. Just to kind of explain the hiatus, it was unintended. Your boy is pursuing knowledge. We're actually back in school now. We're actually, pursuing our MBA. So, it's been a while since I've been a student. So, when I decided to take this challenge on, with my job and with counsel and with everything else going on, I just decided, hey, let me throw myself into this and, give it my best shot and just to get out the gate. And, it's, some things are coming back to me and it's been a while, but, settling in. First semester's coming to an end, but, I had a little bit of a break today, so decided to go ahead and jump into this new series. Also, your boy celebrated his 25th anniversary with my lovely wife. We took a nice week off from everything down in Guanacaste province in Costa Rica. Yes, I'm doing the accent, so please don't roast me when y'all hear that. But that was some time, and we got some pretty interesting things going on in council. We're taking up a restorative economic bill, or as some folks like to call it, reparations for the African American community and business community here. We've launched initiatives surrounding minority entrepreneurism and how to make businesses in the black community viable. Excuse that. But it's been a lot of things. So forgive me if I taken a little hiatus. I've been watching the numbers. You guys have still been downloading and listening to the old episodes, and I appreciate that. It lets me know that you guys are still locked in, ready to go. So once again, this is Superhero Politics. I'm your host, Michael Holmes, and I have been digging this Marvel What If series. So just finished up the whole episode and looked at the last one. So for those of you who have not watched Marvel What If on Disney Plus, check it out. It's a great thing. Now, Marvel What If has been around for a while, for a long time. So Marvel's been doing these kind of what if scenarios. If one thing happened, or if this hero became a villain, or if this villain became a hero, or if this event didn't take place. I remember my introduction to Marvel What If, and it was what if Legion, who is David Haller from the great FXX series, and also Professor Xavier's son, who is one of the Omega level psionics or telepaths. What if he had killed Magneto? Like, how would the world change? I remember reading that and thinking, wow, this is really a great kind of supposition subject. Like, we all ask that question, like, what if? Like, what would have happened if? And so I was inspired to do my own series. And so I did this kind of around the political what ifs. It'll be a little less comic books today, a little bit more politics. So out of the gate, one of the most what's the word I'm even looking for to describe what the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan's effect has been on policy and politics in this country. Like, I mean, it's, he's a towering figure, like, especially in conservative politics. But, it's dubious because it depends on your vantage point. Some people see him as the Messiah, and some people see him as the devil. Like, I'm reminded of the Boondocks episode when, Riley came and crashed the garden party, and he said, Reagan was the devil, 666. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666. Mark of the Beast. And everybody was clapping and cheering because they thought, oh, it's a cute little black kid. But a lot of people have this view of Reagan. Like, to some, he's Jesus, and some, he's Satan. And so, back on March 30th, 1981, a man named John Hinckley Jr. Decided that he, in this delusional fantasy, was going to impress the actress Jodie Foster, who was a child at the time, which is creepy enough, by assassinating Ronald Reagan. People still don't know how those two things are connected. Like, I think people still don't know how Hinckley came to the idea that assassinating the president was going to impress a child actress. People don't understand that. It was just weird. And so, Hinckley's attempt on Reagan's life set off this chain of events. So if you guys remember where the country was, or if you guys were not around in 1981, the country was coming out of the 70s, out of the Carter era. There was, this, to put it in the 39th president's words, the malaise over the country. And Ronald Reagan had captured the national attention with his, movie star, credo and pedigree. He was out of old Hollywood. He had the classic, leading man look, the coiffed hair with the part, and, everything was shtick. Everything was, heavily scripted. Everything was, slapstick or whatever it may be, and Reagan cut this dashing figure of, old Hollywood grandeur that just happened to, cover up this steel-spined, rock-ribbed conservative who was going to lead the country back by, supporting free markets and traditional families and supply-side economics. And and we'll get to that in a minute. But that was kind of what Reagan sold the country. That was the public image, and the media just lapped it up. Like, the media just lapped it up because what had happened was Carter came in after Nixon, Ford, and Carter was a good guy, just a real good salt of the earth kind of Christian guy, but he was kind of seen as this mild-mannered, almost milquetoast type of a leader, someone who wasn't tough, that didn't cut that unapologetically American figure that spoke to strength on the global geopolitical stage. And this is not about Jimmy Carter, but there was so much there that's still misunderstood about that presidency, much like is misunderstood about his successor, I should say. But that's another story. But this is about Reagan. And so in 1981, Hinckley attempts to assassinate Ronald Reagan. And, it was an unsuccessful attempt, but it was an attempt nonetheless that allowed the right, the conservative movement, to both canonize, deify, and make Reagan a living martyr. Like, it's amazing, the idea that these three concepts can exist in the same space. Like, when you deify somebody, you make them, almost larger than life. When you canonize somebody, you imbue them with, levels of virtue that are beyond, humanity. And when someone becomes a martyr, that means that they had the strength to sacrifice their life for their cause. Now, Reagan didn't die, but they were able to portray this assassination attempt, and some people will go on and question, like, was it even really that much of an attempt? Was Reagan really in that much danger? But they were able to take that moment and turn that crisis into opportunity. And so one of the things that Reagan had been trying to pass was his economic plan. But that wasn't like the immediate effect, right? Like, there were so many things that happened because of the public response to this. Like, there was like ripple effects because of Reagan's connection to Hollywood and all these other things. So, there were changes. Like, there were, the Academy Awards were postponed that night. Reagan had taped this message because, him being a B-movie actor and everything, he was, is now president of the United States. And so, obviously they're going to parlay that into the Academy Awards. And then I remember, because I'm in North Carolina, I'm a Tar Heel fan, the NCAA championship between Indiana and University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill was scheduled to go on. I mean, it ultimately did that week. Wasn't postponed. But here's a funny tidbit about how superhero politics and wraps up into this. Like, here's an interesting factoid. Now, if you guys remember William Catt from the 1980s superhero TV show, The Greatest American Hero, the character's name was Ralph Hanley, right? Originally, the character's name was slated to be Ralph Hinckley, and it was debuting in 1981, or right around the time of March. It was supposed to be the debut of the Greatest American Hero TV show with the lead character named Ralph Hinckley. Now, obviously, being that the assassin whose name was John Hinckley, and now here's this character called Ralph Hinckley, like, obviously the networks freaked out and changed it. So that's an interesting factoid of superhero politics and how politics can affect popular culture, especially in the superhero realm. So yeah, that was a little fun fact regarding superhero politics and the connection between the two. So I told you it's super intertwined. But the assassinations of Lincoln and Martin Luther King and JFK, all of these assassinations, like, they just come rushing back when you have an attempt like this. Now, there were no immediate deaths. There were 3 wounded. But James Brady, who was the White House press secretary at the time, suffered severe brain damage. And even though he didn't die directly of that, it was later ruled a homicide because he died from the complications of the brain injury that he suffered during the assassination attempt. Now, if James Brady sounds familiar, he would later be connected to a bill backed by Reagan against the NRA called the Brady Bill, which banned assault weapons. So make that connection. James Brady Bill, ban of assault weapons. So, but yeah, so let's kind of get into, that's kind of the backstory of that. So let's kind of get into the effects of, let's kind of talk a little bit about who Reagan was in reality versus the fan fiction version of Ronald Reagan, as I like to call him, like the comic book version of Reagan. Like, there's this actual Reagan, and then there's this Reagan that is loosely based on the real guy. So the real Ronald Reagan, as described by some of his colleagues in the movies, was the dumbest guy they ever met. Like, there was no way. Like James Garner, who was on the Rockford Files, and I'm really showing my age here, guys. Like, or if you grew up with your grandparents, you might have known who the Rockford Files was. Said he was so dumb that he shouldn't even been president of the Screen Actors Guild, let alone the president of the United States. But Reagan was able to craft this image that he was this grandfatherly type of a guy with this, super sharp wit, and underneath it he was this, hard charging, superhero, almost like he had an alter ego, almost like he was, billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne, as his mask, and then behind the scenes he was the Dark Knight, he was Batman. But Reagan had an indelible effect on politics. Why? Because he literally changed the way politics are done. His rise, his assassination attempt, his connection with the media, his connection with celebrity, all of that changed the way politics is done in America. Before, you had to pay your dues, you had to have this background of policy and service and all these things, and Reagan was deeply, he worked for the Nixon administration. He was governor of California, which he did some super liberal things out there, which makes it ironic that he's this conservative icon. But he came to power with a lot of things that are kind of brushed under the rug, that would not pass the muster today in terms of either social acceptance or conservative acceptance. Like, Reagan launched his career in Philadelphia, Mississippi. So for those of you, and I'm keeping with the theme of connecting movies here, for those of you who know the movie Mississippi Burning, that was the site of where that movie took place, and it kind of detailed the Freedom Rider story and the murder of 3 abolitionists and civil rights actors. And so he launched his bid for president there, and a lot of people saw that as like the wink and the nod to the white supremacists. Ronald Reagan opened the door to religious evangelicals, and even even Barry Goldwater was afraid of those people. He said famously, if these preachers ever get their hands on the Republican Party, God help us all. And then, he opened the door to the corporatization of politics. And so a lot of these things happened because of Ronald Reagan's presidency. And so that kind of led me to talk about, what would have happened had Reagan not survived? How would politics be different? How would the country be different? How would the world be different? Because it was not just domestic politics that Reagan affected. It was literally global geopolitics. And we'll connect those dots later because of Afghanistan. But what would have happened? Let's talk about some of the social effects of the Reagan presidency. Like, Reagan came to office when America was the world's creditor. We were the richest country on earth, and I guess if you're talking about GDP and GNP, we're the richest country on earth, and everyone came to us to borrow money, and we generally pull the strings globally, purse strings globally. Well, Reagan and his supply side economics decided that they were going to cut taxes from 70% to 28%, and created this age of excess, like Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, like all these movies, like the yuppie phase. All these movies happened during the 80s. Like, all of these things were set in the 80s. Like, we talk about Miami Vice, and we talk about Scarface, and we talk about Blow, and we talk about all these drug movies. We talk about New Jack City, which is one of my personal favorites. Like, all of this stuff was set in the 80s. So it was just a culture that was fueled with, money and excess and, drugs and all of these things. And all this stuff happened under the nose of the great communicator. There was just this widening divide of economic disparity between the haves and the have-nots. Donald Trump, cut his teeth and became, Donald Trump in the 80s. You guys remember the lifestyles of the rich and famous with Robin Leach. Champagne wishes and caviar dreams. Like, it was all about how excessive and how ostentatiously you could live in the 80s. Dynasty, Knots Landing, Dallas, all of these shows about these rich white people living these opulent lives. All of this stuff happened in the 80s. And so when we look at what Reagan did in terms of transforming our economic system and our economic view of capitalism, let's step down to how that affected socially. Reagan began to demonize the public welfare system. He coined the term welfare queen, which was this idea that there was this woman who had multiple kids that lived off the system because our welfare system gave such a incentive to not work but to continue to have children and game the system. Like he called them welfare queens, that they wore fur coats and drove Cadillacs and lived in fancy houses all off the government because our welfare system allowed it. Now, obviously what they didn't tell was that couldn't be further from the truth, and the actual welfare was happening on the corporate side. The actual welfare was happening in terms of big agriculture, because the country was subsidizing middle America with taxpayer dollars. You guys remember Hands Across America, you remember Farm Aid, you remember all these things that were subsidizing Midwestern farmers who were decimated by Reagan's economic policies. Yet ironically, they became the most staunch supporters, and it's still that way today. 40 some odd years later, we have middle America who is red as blood, supporting Republican policies which constantly have them in jeopardy economically. And that is because of their allegiance to Reagan. Reagan won 40 states. 40 states and then 49 states subsequently. 500 and some odd electoral points. The largest, win in American history when it comes to politics. The last Republican to win, H.W. Bush. One of the last Republicans to win both the popular vote and electoral college in what we would call landslides today, real landslides. But Reagan's take on our social system didn't end there. Like, it was degradation of public school, our public school system. We went from number 1 in science and math to number 25 and number 27 by the end of his tenure. Everything, all the unions, teachers unions, public sector unions, private sector unions, all these things, Reagan attacked and undermined. Now, that's here domestically, but the effect abroad was just as palpable, because you had the Cold War, you had the Star Wars race, where America and the Soviet Union were racing to get laser futuristic weapons and satellites above the earth to have these early detection systems to monitor the other country on their nuclear capabilities. And so he spent wildly. He expanded the military industrial complex. For the first time in American history, we saw $1 trillion in debt. We got this race to the bottom, or the top, depending on your vantage point, depending on what you like to subscribe to in terms of history regarding the Cold War. All of these things happened because of Reagan. And there were other things like the proliferation of AIDS, like the war on drugs and dare to say no to drugs. Like, all of these things happened under Reagan, and there was such a profound effect and changing effect on America. Now, let's get into the what if. So what if on March 30th, 1981, John Hinckley Jr. was successful at assassinating Ronald Reagan? What would have changed? At that point, the presidential line of succession would have been invoked, and George H.W. Bush would have come to power as the 41st president of the United States. So how would the world have been different? How would George H.W. Bush being president 9 years before he would actually, in the current existence timeline, become president? How would he have been different? How would he have been changed as a person? Because we know up until he became Reagan's vice president that he didn't really rock with Reagan like that. Like he, believed Reagan was, outside the mainstream of the Republican Party. He believed that he was extreme in terms of his social policy, in terms of his economic policy. He called trickle-down economics. He called supply-side economics voodoo economics. He believed that tax cuts as a means of stimulating the economy were a failure. But there was also this there's this undercurrent in conservatism that you back your guy, that you don't turn against the guy, like you fall in line. There's this old saying in politics that Democrats fall in love, but Republicans fall in line when it comes to leadership. And so as you can see, even right now with President Biden, like Democrats fight with each other. They oppose. They have their own little political agendas within the party scheme. Republicans don't have that. Like once there's a person at the top, like everybody falls in behind that. And so the question is, what if Reagan had died? Would George H.W. Bush have carried out the economic plan, the social plan, the geopolitical plan, the foreign policy prescriptions that Reagan had put in place, or would he have been his own guy? Would he have been his own president? So let's just say, for argument's sake, that he hews to Reagan's playbook and he goes on. And so as we know, not much separation there when it comes on domestic drug policy. George H.W. Bush was very involved in the stabilization of South America, where all the drugs were imported coming in. And so, some people in the conspiracy theory circles said that it was George H.W. Bush, as the head of the CIA, that actually let drugs into the United States and allowed them to be distributed within minority communities. So the war on drugs, I think, probably would have been something that stayed. Would he have been as laissez-faire in dealing with the AIDS epidemic? I don't think he would have. I don't think George H.W. Bush would have been that laissez-faire. And I think one of the instances, or one of the points of evidence on why Reagan was so laissez-faire was because there was still this stigma around homosexuality. And so, seeing as HIV/AIDS was primarily posed to the country as a disease only affecting the gay community, Reagan was allowed to ignore it. Why? Because the religious conservatives, the evangelicals, said, hey, this is penance for sin. So he was allowed to ignore that. I don't think George H.W. Bush would have taken that same tact when it comes to dealing with that epidemic, but who knows? And so, but now if we pivot a little bit to foreign policy, this is where I think you get some kind of divergence, and you kind of get a little bit of continuity. Because I do think that ultimately, on the geopolitical stage, that George H.W. Bush would have probably still engaged in the Cold War. Now, to what extent, I'm not quite sure. Now, the one thing that I will say that I believe that would have been diametrically different under George H.W. Bush, assuming the role of president after the assassination of Reagan, would have been our involvement in Afghanistan and the arming of the Mujahideen, and ultimately the creation of the Taliban. I think that, and this is just hypothetical, I think that what probably would have happened is that George H.W. Bush would have taken a little bit less active approach as president to that, to the involvement in Afghanistan in opposition to the Russians. I think he probably would have been a little bit more fiscally prudent regarding the expenditures and the expansion of the military industrial complex. And so what we're looking at right now is 40 years of Reagan-esque policies that have come home to roost. 9/11, direct result of the creation of the Taliban by Reagan, Bush, and who knows, if Reagan doesn't survive that, do we go into Afghanistan? Do we arm the Mujahideen? Do we create Osama bin Laden and the Taliban? And ultimately, does that turn into our attacks, us getting attacked on 9/11? That's a what if. Like, if Reagan is not around, do we undergo any of these things? Now, think about some of the domestic issues. If Reagan is not around, do we bust unions? Do we treat mental health as laissez-faire as we did? Do we turn out all the mental health patients on the streets? Do we demonize teachers? Do we demonize public education? Like, all of these things, all these things that we consider to be our issues dealing every day with the country, all of these things stem from excess and excess in the 80s. All these things stem from this attitude of us versus them that was fostered in the 80s. Do we engage in massive tax cutting for the wealthy, creating the worst income inequality that's seen since prior to the French Revolution? Does this happen if Reagan doesn't survive? Because as we know, George H.W. Bush famously said, read my lips, no new taxes. And then in the lead up to the 1992 presidential race, where he was looking to be reelected, he famously did raise taxes. Now, he fell on the sword. Now, a lot of people don't realize that launched one of the longest most prosperous economic stretches in the history of this country under Bill Clinton. But that was the fulcrum point. That was the point that set it off under George H.W. Bush. Now, the one thing that came from Reagan's survival of this was everybody rallied around everything that he wanted to do. Everything that Reagan wanted, everyone decided, because he had survived, that now we had to pass lock, stock, and barrel his entire economic plan, his entire social plan, his entire social engineering plan, his entire foreign policy plan. So when we think about Grenada, when we think about Beirut, when we think about the involvement in Afghanistan, when we think about the Cold War, when we think about the war on drugs, when we think about the demonization of unions, when we think about tax cutting and Wall Street excess, when we think about all those things, would all those things have happened had Reagan not survived? Would this country look as it does right now? And the other thing that we don't speak about, Reagan's effect, is the level of anti-intellectualism and conservatism now. Reagan made it in vogue to be dumb. Like, everything was a quip or everything was, a sloganeering. Like, all of this political sloganeering that you hear from people like Ted Cruz and Mike Pence and all these people invoking the name of Reagan. Would we have stayed in a political system that judged you based on your merits and your ability to communicate honestly? Reagan also ushered in the Fairness Doctrine, which exploded the right-wing echo chamber of Fox News and AM talk radio, and the Rush Limbaughs and the subsequently, Sean Hannity's of the world. Like, he unleashed this on the country. And as we know right now, One American Network, Breitbart, Red State, all of these, Washington, all these conservative media outlets, they're not bound by ethical standards because of that Fairness Doctrine being passed or being repealed. And so now what's happened is, instead of us having facts being disseminated by media, we now have a conservative set of facts and a liberal sort of set of facts, or just a regular set of facts. Kellyanne Conway famously called them alternative facts. Like the level of disinformation, the level of anti-intellectualism and conservatism, all of this stemmed from Reagan. All of this was because Ronald Reagan decided that it was the political image that mattered and what you could get people to believe. Every politician on the conservative side since Ronald Reagan's rise has sought to position him or herself as the next Reagan or the female Reagan. And none of that is surrounding being truthful. Now, here's the irony of that is Reagan is called the great communicator. Like, that is who they position him as. Like, he's the great communicator. He was able to get to the hearts and minds of the people and make them, come to his viewpoint. That's odd considering that many people, he didn't speak to everyone. He spoke to his political base. He spoke to those political supporters. He spoke to those entities that financed his campaign. Like, he literally divided the country while pretending to communicate with everybody. Now, because of his celebrity, a lot of people imbued him, or they gave him abilities that he didn't have, which is another disastrous effect on our politics. Because now you don't have to be competent, you don't have to be intelligent, you don't have to be accomplished, you don't have to have a background in policy, you don't have to have any of that in conservatism anymore. The another ironic point of Reagan's effect on politics is that now you have the conservative movement who regularly attacks the left or regularly attacks Democrats for their association with Hollywood, because as we know that a lot of people in Hollywood are very liberal. The actresses, the producers, they're very liberal and they support liberal policies. Now, the irony of that is that when you hear conservatives go after the left, it's, don't ever listen. Why would you listen to an actor? He's just an actor. But then you turn around and you look at the projection from the right. Their greatest president to date, that they will claim is the greatest president in American history, was Ronald Reagan, who was an actor. They've elected Sonny Bono, who was an actor. They've elected Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was an actor. They've elected Clint Eastwood, who was an actor. Fred Thompson was an actor. Sean Duffy is a reality TV show person. And then finally, again, Donald Trump was a reality TV star. So the ironic projection is part of this is that you can hate celebrity on the right, but you will elevate celebrity if it hypocritically supports your ability to gain power. Reagan transformed American politics from competence to caricature. He transformed American politics from intelligence to image. And so what if he doesn't survive? Does the right, does conservatism look the way it does now? If Reagan doesn't survive, does conservatism go through this evolution? Does it become what it's become now? And then ultimately, if Reagan doesn't survive assassination, does the Republican Party have a space for Donald Trump? Because I just don't think it does. I think had Reagan not survived, had the assassination attempt been successful, that we would have seen a much closer conservative party to the one that deposed Richard Nixon than the one that supported Donald Trump. That's why we have these hypothetical scenarios, guys, because we don't know how it would have been different, because obviously President Reagan survived. And he carried out his economic plan, he carried out his foreign policy plan, he carried out his social engineering plan, he carried out all these things, and we have the world that we have. And so, as we talk about the what ifs of politics and we talk about the what ifs in comic books, this is one that always stands out. Like, Ronald Reagan was a transformational figure in a lot of ways. It was transformational domestically, socially, globally, because what you had was our first real celebrity president. The first real president that was magnified to superhuman levels. He was our first, we talk about George Washington and Lincoln, and we talk about Teddy Roosevelt. We talk about the guys who are on Mount Rushmore, and we talk about them in superhuman terms because of what they accomplished. Reagan was the first superhuman president in terms of image. His power was, plot twist and plot armor. Like, when you ask someone why Reagan was great, they can't really tell you. Like, they can't really tell you, and it's very similar to how people talk about Donald Trump. Like, they just say they were great. Oh, they were just great. They were amazing, best president ever. But they can't really tell you why. Nobody can pinpoint a particular Reagan policy that made America special, that improved America. As a matter of fact, most of the policies that he implemented, most people, in hindsight, in objectivity, would say that they turned out badly for most people. Most people objectively would say that the policies of Donald Trump turned out badly for people. But this is not what politics is anymore because of Ronald Reagan. Like, it's not about the actual execution and the outcomes of policy. It's about the intent and the marketing of policy. How with a straight face today, every conservative will say, yeah, we can cut taxes and they'll pay for themselves. Even though we have the deficits as far as the eye can see, we have the debt as far as the eye can see, fueled primarily by tax cuts that you have to finance. But they just say it now because that's the spiel. That's what the image of this policy is now. That it'll pay for itself. We don't have to worry about that. We'll score it dynamically. It'll pay for itself. It's the anti-intellectualism. It's the anti honesty. It's the sheer bravado of being able to say something and not have to be accountable for it. Like, that's the legacy of Reagan. And so I don't know if he doesn't survive that assassination attempt, that we move in this direction, because a lot of figures who invoked the name of Reagan did so at the end. Like, they invoked the name of Reagan because they were able to use him to bring other people into the fold. People like Newt Gingrich and Mitch McConnell and individuals like that who used Reagan's legacy to pass policies that they knew would be unpopular. And so Reagan became this transformational figure in the sense of he gave conservatism this martyr, this rallying point to be able to pass an unpopular agenda, and also he made room for unqualified candidates. Now all you have to do is you have to project the right conservative image. You have to say the right things, and you have to be politically incorrect, or you have to be ultra conservative and be against this and be against that. And there's no room for dissent. There's no room for opposing viewpoints within the party. Like, you had to fall in line. And so that's Reagan's legacy. That's what Reagan has done in terms of transforming conservatism, and how juxtapose that against the rest of the United States, against the world and the rest of politics. Because now, there's an orthodoxy that you have to follow in to be a conservative. And now what Trump has done is Trump has taken that and he's consumed that and he's transformed it into even more of an authoritarian, autocratic type of policy. And it's even evolved from that point. So what you have now is You have Trump taking Reagan's legacy, injecting it with gamma radiation, and now it's this hulking, uncontrollable monster that threatens to destroy all of our political reality, our democracy, as you will. And so I just go back and I think that if Reagan doesn't survive, do we ultimately get this line to Trump? Do we get this line to 9/11? Do we get this line to income inequality? Do we get this line to racial animus? All of these things that you can directly trace back to the Reagan presidency, do they happen? Do they still happen if he does not survive assassination? What if Reagan didn't survive assassination? What does this country look like? What does our politics look like? What does our world look like if Reagan dies on March 30th, 1981? Folks, I would be completely floored and appreciative if you guys would send me emails with your own theory on what you think would have happened if Ronald Reagan died on March 30th in an assassination attempt. Like, I would love to hear from you guys. Like, I would love to hear your responses to this episode, and I'd love for you guys to get back to me. So if you want to respond, and I'll in the next episode of What If, because this is going to be a series. Like, we're going to do a couple of more episodes of What If hypotheticals in politics, and I'll read some of your emails and some of your responses. Guys, I really love that type of response. This is something new that I think we're doing this year, this season in superhero politics, and I love more interaction from the listeners. So if you guys want to respond, superheropolitics@gmail.com. Send me an email. Send me your thoughts on how you would feel about this, what you believe would have happened had Reagan not survived. Send me your ideas for topics of what ifs. You know, it can be comic book related or it can be political related. I think, this is going to be a little bit more focused towards the political side. But if you guys, want to talk about a what if in comics, then we'll do that too. But guys, I really appreciate you being with us. Sorry for the long break. Said earlier in our intro that we had have a lot going on. But I've missed you guys. There's so much more content to come. Look forward to the next series of What If. I think I will release a short upcoming intro about what it's going to be. I haven't really decided yet. I got a couple of topics on the table, but I know whatever it is, I think you guys will enjoy it. So until next time, true believers, this has been Superhero Politics, and I'm your host, Michael Holmes. What's going on, true believers? Thank you for your continued and growing support. If you're enjoying the content that we're producing here on Superhero Politics, I ask that you subscribe anywhere that you can find podcasts. That means iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. You can find us at Buzzsprout, and also on our social media at Superhero Politics on Twitter, at Superhero Politics on Facebook, Superhero Politics on Instagram, and Superhero Politics on TikTok. Like, share, join us, and if you would have any topics that you would like to share or just questions that you would like to ask me, you can send your emails to superheropolitics@gmail.com, and we'll do an episode where we answer your questions. Thank you for your continued support, and remember, always speak truth to power.